In the previous module, you saw how to add conditional breakpoints so your code would break when an expression was true, like a variable having a certain value or a hit count exceeding a threshold. Breakpoints are great, but they're related to your debugging session. What if you want to include certain assumptions in your code that the state of the application meets certain expectations, so that you get notified when that expectation isn't met? That's what debug.assert allows you to do. You typically add a debug.assert line at the entry point to a method to verify that the incoming parameters are within expected values. Then you know that the code is being called properly. When used like this, it's particularly useful when working on a team and your code is being called by other developers' code. This way, your expectations about how the code should be used are baked right into the code. When your app is running in debug mode and the condition in debug.assert fails, the code breaks at the assert line, so the developer can check local variables. You can also specify a message to output, and that message gets sent to all the trace listeners that the debug class is configured to use. Remember, that's the output window by default, unless you add other trace listeners. And just like with other methods of the debug class, debug.assert statements will get removed when the app is compiled for release, so you don't have to worry about unexpected behavior in your production apps. During development, assertions reflect the assumptions of the developer who wrote the code, and even when they're not triggered during execution, they provide built-in documentation for anyone reading the code, except this documentation is actually enforced. Before I do a demo, I just want to show you that debug.assert is used extensively in .NET itself. So this is an approach that Microsoft uses with their own code. You can see the source code for .NET on GitHub. You can browse through the various libraries yourself. Or there's also a site called source.net that allows you to browse and search the code. For example, let's search for string builder. From the list that's returned, we can see it's in the system.private.corelib library. I'll select the class and the CS file. Now, if I hit Control F to open a search and search for debug.assert, there are quite a few instances in this file, as shown by the lines on the right. Debug.assert is used at the start of this method, and this method is called by several other methods in the file, by the way, so it's reused throughout this class. We can scroll down and see many other instances of debug.assert. It's often used at the end of a method also, to verify that any calculations are valid before returning. So the point is, if debug.assert is something that Microsoft thinks is useful to include in its own source code that's maintained by a team of developers, then you might want to consider using it too. Let's see how we can do that in the sample web application next.